Hello, and thanks for tuning in. Okay, before I address the conversation that you're about ready to watch, a few housekeeping things. The Art of Circling, which is a year-long training the main thing that I do for a living, and my company does, which is the training in circling. So, if you haven't heard of circling before, some of the ways of being that you see here on the channel and some of the other videos around like deep listening and philosophical insight and ways of seeing what isn't necessarily immediately apparent, but seeing the background, opening your heart, all the different flavors of things that you've seen on the channel. There's actually there's a skill and a capacity that that you can train in to develop that machinery, to be able to deeply connect in that way with other people on an emotional level, on a cognitive level, on a bodily level, um, a way of responding, a way of listening, a way of sovereignly speaking your mind while staying deeply connected to the other person, and also really being able to, I would say, fully go on someone's ride in such a way that you both are more nourished through the interaction and the dialogue. So, anyways, circling. Um, so the training starts in about a week and a half. So if you are interested and you haven't contacted me, please do that like right away. My email's below. And I also have a slot open for coaching and one-on-one work. So if you're interested in that, email me as well. The link for information about the course is below. And this is the second part of the dialogue, the three-way dialogue between J.Vervaeke, Johannes, and myself. And if you haven't watched the first one, I would recommend that you do that. But if you can also just start here and launch off, because the nature of these dialogues, especially the ones with more than just two people, you kind of it's interesting. There's so many levels of things being revealed, and at once almost. I find them kind of a bit fractal, right? The whole thing is kind of in every part, and so there's many layers that are being revealed in the dialogue, in the way that we're dialoguing, that I want to encourage you just to tune into. So you can just jump right into this one because it's not very linear. We kind of follow the flow of the conversation. This one is particularly looking at Heidegger's notion of the age of technology and the history of the understanding of being as the forgetfulness of being in Heidegger speak, right? And how that relates to John's notion of the meaning crisis and getting those two talking together. And I think that really happened, and so much more. So without further ado, enjoy.
Yeah, I think that was
What
beautifully well
has
said.
been-
One of my translations of the Heraclitus actually says something.
I really
It
like
is the hand. It's all in the hands.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
right? It's
yeah.
it's like when Heidegger says verwinden, to get over instead of overcome, instead of überkommen. So techniques and framing must be verwinden. That means you don't go over it. You go right in.
Yeah.
And then you turn it from within, because it's not about getting rid of it. It's about understanding where it comes from. Heidegger keeps saying it does have an origin.
Mm.
We must find that origin, because if not, then we're cut off. And that means we live ultimately in a meaningless world that's quite vacuous.
Huh. That notion of origin, right? The picture I get from how I hear that is it's like different than source, right? Source has kind of like a from to, right, sense to it. Origin has more of this, it's somehow present right now, right? It's like somehow present underneath the origin of something. I have this sense of where I can reveal the origin of this sentence or the origin of this moment. There is this kind of quality to it.
We carry that in the adjective original,
Yeah.
where we mean it's a property that something can currently have that
Yeah.
points back to its origin, right? So there is that sense in the adjective. To say that something's original is actually to talk about how it is now, even though you're presumably referring to something in its past.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Original does carry that sense. Origin does carry that sense with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Origin is like this, right? In terms of the hand, it goes up. It's the wellspring of meaning.
Yeah.
It's not a source, right? We said that could give rise to being a resource, etc., which then could be sound like we're exploiting it. But no, origin, and this is what Heidegger keeps coming back to when he says that origin is not something 2,500 years ago. I'm not saying go back to the golden age of the Greeks. No, there is something of origin waiting in these texts, in these testimonials of logos, of knowledge, of ratio, and of being itself, of course, that there's still something to be found in them, right? And the other way of dealing with philosophy, so we've made this distinction, John, you made this distinction between philosophia, of course, the love of wisdom, and academic philosophy. Now, philosophia means, okay, there's a sense of origin. There's something there, there's something there. If when I read these texts, I come to these texts not to be right or to find where Plato was wrong, but to be transformed by them.
Yes.
Because there must be a reason why Plato is Plato, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I see in academic philosophy now is something else, which is, in my mind, a bit cut off from origin, because what we now see, is Spinoza a realist or is he more an idealist? If he is an idealist, is he a dogma, etc., whatever he is, some kind of ism. That's no longer this sense of an original access to this thought, because ultimately these isms don't matter. What matters is something else. And that's this sense of getting back in touch with what there is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
With meaning. Let's just say it's
well, I think it is. I think that connectedness with what is, that affords transformation, is what people are even talking about in the psychological literature, ultimately about meaning.
Yeah.
So two things come up then to tie back to previous things, right? That the discussion of the origin, I think, resonates with the discussion we were having about tradition. Yeah. And then I think of the Enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment's rejection of tradition as an oppressive, it's a Gnostic attitude, right? It's in the pejorative sense of Gnostic, the rejection of tradition as an oppressive structure, right? That is keeping us, from the promised future or something like that. And then I think that is bound up with what we were also discussing, this truncation of rationality down to basically monologic inferential argumentation and losing the connection with ratio and logos. Those two things seem to be coming to meet together at sort of a historical moment in the Enlightenment. And that's pertinent to me because we have people, obviously the person that comes to mind is Steven Pinker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Basically saying Enlightenment now, right? The problem, the doubling down, right? The idea, the problem is we're just not accepting how really, really wonderful the Enlightenment is. And again, to be Heideggerian about this is to not deny, seriously to not deny everything the Enlightenment has given us, right? And science is an important thing. I'm a scientist. I value it. The increase in healthcare, that is not a minor thing in human existence, etc. So and he puts up all of his graphs, and there's no denying well, actually some of the graphs I think are controversial, but there's no denying most of the graphs. But but there's a sense in which the graphs, for all the ways in which they're graphic, they miss the point. They miss the point of how the Enlightenment, again, cut us off from ratio and cut us off from tradition, and in that significant, deep way, cut us off from a cultural cognitive grammar for falling in love with being.
Yes. It's so, to make a Heideggerian point of full agreement, the trouble is and enlightenment forgets darkness, concealment, and
Yes,
forget.
and the horror, right?
Yes, and
It forgets that part of the sacred is the horror.
yeah. But
If you're not open to horror, you're closed off to awe. And if you're closed off to awe, wonder differs from curiosity in that wonder calls everything into question.
Yeah, but yes, and on top of that, you could say horror comes back to haunt you.
Yes.
On a different level and more fundamental, and then you're no longer even capable of dealing with it because you're not used to it being there, being part or at the heart of existence. You could say, why is death so extremely outsourced or denied in our epoch? It's Norbert Elias spoke about the loneliness of the dying. This is a tremendous societal problem. But death itself, what is it for the Greeks? For the Greeks, death is at the heart, or is an irresolvable mystery or problem at the heart of existence. But for us today, it's, according to Harari, just a technical problem waiting to be solved, right? And I think maybe Pinker would be in agreement with Harari here. I don't know, but when I don't know if you might know John Gray. He's a British philosopher, and in one of his books, I think The Soul of the Marionette, which is a reference to Heinrich von Kleist, he says that what he sees with this new Enlightenment movement by people like Richard Dawkins and Pinker and others is that what's the world they want to live in? Do they want to live as in the machine stops in a bunker somewhere, looking at graphs where they get a news feed every day, how much better the world is, and in terms of, oh look, it's all moving upwards. But what's hidden in these graphs is that even if we've got all the best healthcare and people live longer, etc., the intricacies, the existential problems of being a human being don't go away. They don't just disappear. They're still, right? You still have to die. You still face all the horror that everyone else has faced, and hopefully not as bad as some have had to go through. But still, this is not. It forgets darkness, this Enlightenment movement, but it brings back another kind of darkness, right? If you keep staring at the sun will turn dark, and you will turn blind. You can't just be in sheer light all the time.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that was very, very well said.
Yeah.
It strikes me, even if we move to the sort of popular culture, because I talk about this in the course. I talk about how, even in my class, how, in fact, even many of the movies we call horror movies are not horror movies. They're just, I call them startle and puncture movies. They're just movies that are designed to give us more and more intense experiences of our fear of predation. We're wired to be afraid of predators because we, all of the previous, we were preyed on for a very long time. So that's deep in us. So we can push that button just like you can push, the glucose button, and people will gorge on sugar, and they will gorge on the fear of predation. But there's very few movies that actually give you, like, there should be something that's on the same scale. There should be an aspect of wonder in horror. Like in wonder, you call yourself and your grip on reality, right, into question. And horror should be like where you and your sense of self and your sense of your grip on things is called radically into question. Now, I found there are a couple of movies that do that. They try to do horror. But I think it bespeaks the point we're talking about, that popular culture actually also, and this is such a Heideggerian thing, it hides horror under the mask of what it calls horror. It actually prevents us from encountering horror by putting it in this mask on front of it, which makes it basically a monster to be killed, right? Right? All you have to do is actually, if you can just face your fear of predation and turn and face the monster, right, kind of thing. Whereas, no, right? Horror should leave you with a mystery that undermines your sense of, ultimate security. That's part of what horror should do for you. It should be like, it should have to my mind, it should have aspects. I mean, it is just psychologically, it's on a continuum with awe and wonder.
Yes, it's something. There's something just about like bringing in a contemporary culture, right? Of
Yeah.
it's like, where is it? And this is one of the things I think I'm getting more of a sense of, okay,
Hmm.
to relate with, to look for the place that where we can genuinely find the horror, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
the sense is what's really interesting is that,
Yeah.
and this is one of the things about the this notion of like the age of technology, right? Is that, for example, when I go to, actually I was in Atlanta visiting my mom. She lives in Atlanta, and we went to this temple that they had actually shipped over block by block, from India, and
Okay.
it was a like a Hindu temple, like to
Oh,
the
wow.
max,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I remember I went in there, and the whole thing, every single part of it was carved and animated and told a story. And I didn't even know what the story was. I couldn't understand it, but like it communicated just this deep sense of this ever infractaling sense of
Yeah.
recognition of being, nothing, everything. Like, you get to the center of the thing, you look up, and there's this, like, it goes into, it's just like you're you're walking out, and you're just like present, man, like vibrating it. And then we walked back out, and I looked up, and I looked across the street, and there's this shopping center, right? And there's just the people walking along, and like this awful road, right? With it, and I was so struck and horrified. But here's the thing that seems horrifying. It's not that we live in places like that and that they exist. It's that, and that they're horrifying. The horror is that everybody's walking around and nobody is saying this is horrible, right?
So,
There's very few people that are walking around. They're just in the flow of it. But there, as you look like at these houses that are the same, just a little bit of difference. Like,
yeah.
buildings are built to look like something, right? Versus being something, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like that's where I feel a particular,
Right.
the thing that is horrifying and fascinating. And I'm wondering if this is like an example of starting to actually look at the withdrawal, right? Seeing the withdrawal and being in relationship to it. Is it seems like part of the withdrawal is no one is noticing the withdrawal, right? Isn't that?
Well, yeah. Nietzsche says in the genealogy of morality,
Yeah.
and he also speaks of the horror vacui, so the sheer horror of emptiness, and he says rather than not willing, the will wants nothing,
Yeah.
right? So I'd rather become a great destroyer.
Yeah. Fromm said that too, right?
Yeah.
When people can't make anything, they, rather than doing nothing, they'd rather smash everything down, because
Yeah.
at least they've got the last vestiges of their agency.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about what Guy just said. There's a sense in which people, and I mean, that was part of the whole book that I wrote with Chris and Philip, right? The zombie. The zombie is the being that is completely unaware of the fact that it's a zombie, that
Yeah.
is disconnected from the world, from itself, from its. The zombie is all of the disconnections, unaware of
Yeah.
the disconnections, and it's a symbol. But you know, Leo and Anderson and I, we reviewed a couple of movies on the week. That are going to come out in the Minding Media series, with Joker, in which you see a shift from the zombie to something worse, and it goes to the point we just spoke about. Where now, of course, the Joker, spoilers here, by the way, spoilers. Joker is about the meaning crisis. I think that's very clear, because all of the tropes of meaning, his connection to his past is undermined. If the very story that we're watching, we lose any sense of dramatic irony because we don't know what's real and not in it, right? His name is oxymoronic. He's Arthur, the great king. Fleck, a meaningless piece of crap. Arthur Fleck, we're getting pounded over the head, and then we see him sort of devolve into all he wants is whatever kind of attention is left, right? That's all, right? There's no meaning, no value, no connectedness. It's just the sheer, it's even beyond, right? It's even beyond sort of destructiveness. It's just, right? The last, narcissism is the last vestige of attention. Well, at least, things are, people are still paying attention to me. And then what was interesting about that is, the way, again, what we're talking about, instead of the shuffling zombies at the shopping mall, you have the angry crowd in riot, focused on a figure that's not a leader in any sense, but what he's doing is he's trying to make the environment as absurd as his own narcissism, because that's the last bit of conformity that's possible for him. That's the last bit of him having a connection to reality available to him, right? And so I think, and the fact that that movie was so popular and got so much attention, yes, people aren't talking about it. And so you're right, Guy, there's still zombies, but I'm afraid that we're actually moving to something beyond them not talking about it. I think we're moving to the possibility that they might start acting out from it, not acting on it, but how we talk about somebody acting out, when they're acting out, like when a child is acting out an issue that it doesn't properly understand, right? That's how I'm trying to use that phrase, because that's what Joker is, right? He's the child man that's acting out how the meaning crisis is shifting from the zombie horde to the violent absurdist narcissist. And I think that's something to really, really pay attention to. And for me, that brought with it a kind of horror that goes beyond. Sorry, I'm not trying to trump you or anything, Guy. It goes beyond the horror of the zombie. The horror of the zombie is that vacancy, right? But the horror of Joker is a different thing. It's that this is now twisting in a way that I think is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. If it portends, if the movie isn't just a movie and is a myth of some kind that's emerging. The fact that it takes place around a mythic character is also, kind of something thought-provoking, I would say.
This is, I just want to make sure I got what you're saying, like the new loop around, right? Which is, it's not just the vacancy, right, of being a zombie. It's that I act out of being that vacancy, and my only, the thing you said about conformities, the last conformity that I have left to...
the last way in which I can be identical to the unfolding of being is if being is, if the unfolding of being is primarily absurdity, right? And especially if that's how I'm participating in it, because a narcissist's existence is one of enacted, embodied absurdity, right? If I can make the absurdity out there as comprehensive as possible, then at least I have that final last ditch connection to things.
But this is extremely important to think this through further and also make as many people as possible aware, because I think what we're pushing against is you can call it late modern subjectivity, hyper modern subjectivity.
Exactly.
It's subjectivity collapsing into itself, and it's becoming paranoid. You can see how it's losing its grip on reality, how it's losing its sense of certainty that it was given by Descartes and others, right?
Exactly.
Absolute sense of certainty is now collapsing, and all I'm left with is, as you said, is this absurdity. It's being unfolding as absurd, and now all I can do to make sense of anything or posit myself again is by acts of sheer and utter brutal violence, for example.
Yes, exactly.
That just bring my horror that I can't cope with, because the world isn't supposed to be horrible, but somehow it's completely absurd. I bring this horror into the world and I assert myself with it and give myself some certainty before I ultimately collapse. What I see in all of the madness is subjectivity pushing to its utmost limit at the moment.
Exactly. I think that was beautifully said. I think that developed my point very well. I really like what you just said. I think that's that's it. That dimension you added is insightful.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's kind of like there was a sense to that movie, actually, right? As everyone gathered along, that it looked very much like some of the protests at Berkeley, right? Like I remember walking out one time. I used to live right across the street from Berkeley, like the main campus, and we had a meeting, and helicopters were going, and you're hearing noises, and there's riots, and it was just, I don't know, it was like Ben Shapiro or something speaking, right? And you walk outside, and there was literally the hammer and sickle spray painted on all the buildings, and it was this. It's interesting because I'm thinking about this sense of like it was a very moral stance. Like, how could you have this, whatever the assertion was about that person? But it was like uncanny. It was eerie walking out in the streets afterwards, and yet it was very tied to a morality. Weirdly enough, and I'm just
It's tied to morality as
when we at the end of that movie, when everyone was like, rah, right, like
there was
total.
no morality. There's not tied to anything.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the thing is, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of this.
Yeah, totally.
So there is, but there is the collapsing of morality to the assertion of rules and propositions.
Right.
So morality in those kinds of protests has been divested from virtue. Like it's been disconnected from virtue in some really important ways that needs to be talked about. Again, I don't want to claim that people within a democracy shouldn't protest. Obviously, they should, etc. I'm clearly not saying that. But what I'm talking about the content in which the protest is expressed, not the fact or the goal of the protest. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's be clear about that. I'm not talking about the fact or the goal of protest. I'm talking about the content in which it expressed and whether or not that expression actually sits well with the fact and the goals of protest.
Yeah.
I mean, it claims to be, it makes moral claims, but when you separate morality, I think, from virtue, especially the virtues of wisdom and courage, right, and sophronism, then your protestations, literally, about justice are going to be very hollow in an important sense that we're talking about here. Yeah. And then, so I see that as actually what you get sort of before you get what you see in Joker, which is what you're pointing to. You get the protest that is just protest.
Yeah.
It serves absolutely. It's even given up the pretense of virtue signaling or making moral assertions. It's just smashing and anger and let's make everything. Let's just break apart whatever structures are left, because structure itself, intelligibility itself, has now become oppressive to us. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. I think that's right. Now you see where we are. We're in the depths of the meaning crisis. We're in the depths of talking about the meaning crisis.
Yeah. Do you think, as a question on that intelligibility has become oppressive to us? Has that anything to do with what I would think of as paranoia of late modern subjectivity?
I think so. I think that we've lost, well, you could correct me on this, but I think that this is something I sort of see in Heidegger. I see it also in Wittgenstein in a way, that intelligibility is supposed to be something that gets us beyond our subjectivity, that it is not just about what you get, what starts to emerge right in the 11th century. It's not just internal coherence amongst my propositions, right? It's not just the coherence. That that intelligibility is supposed to give me it's supposed to give me some kind of access beyond my subjectivity. And I think when you lose that, right, when you lose that sense of intelligibility that way, then of course isn't it going to go from being like a lens through which you see, if you'll allow me this metaphor, it has some bad connotations that I don't want. But if it goes through, I want to pick up on the double sense of the word through, right? Then intelligibility is something I see through, like beyond and by means of. If I lose the sense of seeing through, all I'm going to get is looking at, and then that's a wall.
Yeah.
Right. That's a wall. Right. If I can't see through, in both senses of the word through, then I'm looking at. That's a wall, and that all it is just the echoing of my own subjectivity. It's just the prison. Right. It's just the prison. I think that is exactly what you're pointing to with what you said, and that's why I place so much. Like I talk a lot about the transparency, opacity, shifting of attention, and we have to remember that, and then we have to somehow work that back into our understanding of understanding.
Yeah.
Understanding of understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, because what I think is just in line with that, what you just said is, so we look at someone like Fichte, right? For Fichte, Fichte says something along the lines of, I always recognize myself in nature. He has to say that because nature is just fiction for him.
Yes,
and you have Hegel and Schelling who try to rescue nature a bit, but that didn't really work out. And what I'm trying to say is that what the trajectory we're on is that the self-certainty of the self-asserting, self-referential subject or ego has lost its certainty with the death of God, most importanly. And because God, let's not forget, God is a hypothesis that Laplace no longer needs, right?
Yes.
God is a hypothesis that Descartes needs in order to guarantee that the world out there is actually there. That's meditations. And to make sure that actually all these people out there are not robots / zombies, right? They're actually human beings. God makes sure of that, but I can't really be sure of that myself because all I know is me. And once this certainty disappears, once the causa sui, this ungodly, this non-godlike God, just evaporates into an ever-exploding non-cosmos and black holes, what we're left with is something subjectivity doesn't know and can't make sense of. So hence, it's, as you said, stuck in a wall, it's stuck in itself, and it reacts violently. And I keep saying it because I don't want to pin it down on anyone, right?
No.
Because I think it is ultimately structural, historical.
Yes.
But there is, to me at least, there clearly are paths out of it. And they have to do with what we talked about now is, you could say, you call it tradition, you could call it sources or origin or wisdom, sources of wisdom, etc. Those would be those would be different paths out of it into a different way of, as you put it, an understanding of understanding that takes us out of ourselves and into the non-propositional poetic world.
Well said, beautifully said. Yes.
What did he just say?
You didn't hear it.
I wanted something hit you there. I want to hear about that.
I got from that. I think I agree with the idea that Descartes represents this pivot point in which the conformity to the world is withdrawn until this specious moment of self-conscious conformity with itself, sort of pure subjectivity. And what Descartes needs is he needs right, something that gives him egress, something that gives him a way out of that, and God is supposed to do that. But this is the God of certainty, right? This is not the God of sacredness. This is the God of certainty. And the problem is that God ultimately evaporates, as Johannes says, and then what we get is we get trapped within this subjectivity. And I think it's not even that it becomes opaque. I would wanted to add that it's collapsing because if what you're trying to find is the moment of certainty, it's vanish. It's like almost like a singularity. You're vanishing and vanishing and vanishing towards it, and so the wall is closing in and closing. So rather than paranoia, Johannes, I would suggest it might be something more like existential claustrophobia that we're in, right? That we're sort of like. That's what I heard. That's what I heard him saying.
Yeah. It's something about like if I sit with, all right, so it's like there's this sense of like claustrophobia. I'm being closed in, right? And the rages come out like Joker movies, like all of that. So if we bring back in is it Nikitashi, the guy?
Nishitani.
Yeah. It's funny. I just found myself going like, okay, so what is So if that's how it's happening, this is how things are occurring for us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If we look at it, like, I just thought about this of like, okay, what would what would he do, right? Well, and there's a sense of where I was like, oh, he would probably, I just had this sense of it would just go and something, it would
I like the noise. The noise is great.
Yeah,
there's something about, and I think this is one of the things that I like, kind of in a certain sense, being right sized to what's actually happening and being still being immortal and realizing on some level that we are, you know, ontologically being is that one thing that we can never get clear on, right?
Yes. But the Western late modern subjectivity, we're all Fichteans. That's what I'm going to say. You know,
Yeah.
but we're forever saying, "But I am I am I, ich bin ich bin ich," closing in. But that I know, right? Even if everything's absurd, I can still assert myself by bringing sheer horror and absurdity to a hypermodern hellhole. But the other response would be, "I am mortal. I am nothing." You begin with nothing. I am sheer withdrawal, and all of a sudden, it could go away. That's the exercise. Because if I am nothing, it doesn't. It's not a nihilistic self denial and self annihilation. I shouldn't be nothing of the sort. No, there isn't this core self, perhaps, but there is a sense of nothingness, but in a different way that we think of it in the West. Right, and beginning from this stance, you open up again, and this wall that John was describing, this wall disappears.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that I think is deeply convergent with that. Nishitani would say, as you move towards the center of the self, you're not moving to the foundational certainty. What you do is you suddenly uncover the mystery of the no-thingness from which the self is always emerging, but never in some sort of fixed and stabilized way. And if you can get, and I think James was getting towards this too when he made the distinction between the me and the I. The words aren't totally right, but that's what he was trying to get at. He was trying to get at, when you move towards the center, you don't move to the fixed foundation. You actually move into the no-thingness. You move into that aspect of mystery that is at, I don't like this metaphor, but it's at the center, right? And so Nishitani would point to the fact that if you follow it far enough in, you find that there's no difference between moving in and moving out. That you find a different kind of conformity rather than the absurdity. There's a deep conformity between the no-thingness and the no-thingness, and then that affords. Right? That affords you moving back into anagoge. That's what I see him basically articulating. So that if you can see the no-thingness as that which affords radical transframing rather than as the privation of graspable, securable actuality, then you can get out of the claustrophobia. That's what I see him as saying. It's because the West can only, if you'll allow me to use these two words, because the West can only represent no-thingness as nothingness, that it can't make that move. And so all it does is it gets to that point. It gets to that point.
Yeah. And we
need actuality. We need actuality to come back to that.
So what do you mean by that, Johannes?
No, but so the self is the actual.
Yes.
Rather than the potential or the possible. Sorry. Yeah. Guy, you were saying.
Yes. No. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm just sensing into that kind of figure ground shift of like the nothing.
It's an aspect reversal. Yeah. It's a fundamental figure ground shift. Yes. And it's a perspectival participatory thing. It's not an argumentative thing.
Yeah.
You can't get to it by argumentation.
And that's
argumentation always works within a stabilized perspective and existential mode. And we're talking about a fundamental reversal. The argumentation can come after and perhaps engage in explication and elucidation, but the process itself is not an argumentative process.
Right. So it's like really like I'm wondering about just the sense of, so when I kind of just feel into it, like one thing is like I simultaneously go, there's some kind of risk. right? So if the walls are coming in, there's like a risk. I in some way actually have to, I have to almost like let go of all of Western metaphysics, right? Like there's some kind of leap in there of
Yeah.
of rather than pushing away, but actually whatever the experience is, I keep getting the sense of keep watching it. No, like I'm getting the sense of meditation in that sense of the word, of some kind of vulnerability
Mhm.
to be with the horror, and everything that we're talking about. I'm just sensing a certain kind of like a response is a certain kind of vulnerability.
There is. I mean, within my own practice, you get to this place where you step into sort of, because you can't grasp it, you can only be it. You can feel, I'll use Johannes's language because it's perfectly appropriate actually for the phenomenology. You feel the perpetual withdrawal, the meditation, right? The perpetual withdrawal. You suddenly, it's like the back falls out from behind you. That's why I liked your whoosh, right?
Yes.
Like, because in meditation, you're stepping back and you're stepping back and you're looking at and you're looking at, and then all of a sudden, the what you're stepping back into, it like whoosh, and you get the sense of like that. That's why I like that noise. That you get that sense of of withdrawal, which is not the sense of a thing. It's not even the sense of a presence. It's that I have no other word for it. It's just the phenomenological experience of the sense of withdrawal, and that can be initially really, really, as you can imagine, horrifying to people. It can be very horrifying.
Right. Yeah. Especially having got, having had facilitated experiences of that horror, that sense of like everything slipping away.
Yeah, you
And then
shouldn't be
that very thing that it's almost like the last bit of concern or care is flipping on. And then at some point it goes, and then you're everywhere. There's a sense of like, that's been my experiences with those places where I've done a psychedelic, or I've had an experience where it's like, oh, like the ground starts to slip, right? And then I can't grip onto anything. And that sense of, and then there's a kind of like some kind of threshold of where it feels like a death of some kind, right? And a dissolving. And then this recognition that the whole time, the thing I'm expanding into was present the whole time, right? Somehow, like, and there was some way I was standing in relationship to it, or identified, that had it show itself as that which was horrifying. Just that kind of process.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds very similar to what I'm describing. So for Nishitani, that's what I mean. I mean, obviously there's argumentation in religion and nothingness, but religion and the nothingness should not be read separate from a deep kind of meditative contemplative practice. Just like you shouldn't read the Tao Te Ching if you're not doing Tai Chi Chuan. You're just deeply not getting it in a really important sense. That's interesting, because I'm interested in when people have these kinds of experiences, because sometimes the phenomenology is one of like almost like I said, this whoosh, and then the other is it's oh my gosh, it's like it's not directional. Sometimes the withdrawal feels that way, but sometimes it feels more like everything is almost holographically, everything is opening up. Right. Right. Almost like sort of, like how Plotinus describes the one, all the forms are reflecting and interpenetrating each other, but the one is what allows for all the opening up and interpenetration that is not actually in any one of the forms. And you get that. You get that too. That has actually become more common for me than just the withdrawal experience.
Right. Right. Yeah, that sounds very familiar too. Yeah, totally.
So the point to get back to it, the point Nishitani is making, of course, again, you don't stop doing the argumentation. I'm going to keep saying that. You do you create religion in nothingness, but you also do these perspectival participatory transformations. And then there is some kind of, allow me this metaphor, there's a dialogos between them, and the response is in that dialogos. It's not in the text, it's not just in the meditative practice, but in that
relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I started meditate. I went to a Vipassana retreat,
Sure.
right? And then I think a few months after that is when I started reading Being in Time. And I remember that after reading Being in Time and meditating a couple hours a day, back and forth, that it changed my meditation, right?
Yeah.
There was a kind of a sense in which, like,
I expect the reverse was also the case. I expect the meditation afforded you seeing things in Being in Time that you wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Right.
That's what we've circled back around again, about trying to get to the place of the philosopher rather than just gather their propositions. And there's all these, and this was alive for a long time in the Neoplatonic tradition, that around the text was a whole ecology of practices, and the text or the discourse and the practices were always in dialogue with each other. Yeah. And this is what Hadot brought out so beautifully. I think this was one of Hadot's great points.
Yes.
Hadot, yeah.
Hadot, yeah. But when you look at, not to make this too biographical about anyone, but Heidegger had circles of students that he invited over for long extended sessions of simply thinking, and sometimes they would collapse and sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they were successful. And he, as you know, he worked with Medard Boss from the 50s to the late 60s, who was a Swiss psychiatrist in what's now published as the Solikon seminars. And there are still people practicing Dasein's analysis or existential therapy that came out of that.
Right,
so Heidegger worked with psychiatrists for a decade or more until he couldn't anymore longer. And that was his way of and he provoked them, right? Because they were totally within a Cartesian framework. They were very often outraged by what he said. That you can't begin with the ego, you have to begin here, you have to begin with Dasein, and Dasein is out in the world, and it's being with others, etc. But he never shied away from that. It was about bringing it into practice. It wouldn't have been him to do it. It would need someone else to do it. But that was not his role, and he was aware of this, because for him this was ontic. This was something that others would have to do, but he provided the ontology for that, right? His thinking, and it needs practice, and I see it with students too. That it actually they come to university and they're quite enthusiastic, and after a couple of years they sound like everybody else. And rather than still having, because what I always do is first seminar, first year students, ancient Greek philosophy, why are you here? That's my first question. And sometimes I get, is this relevant for the exam? And sometimes I get
my mug. Everything I say will be on the exam.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And I keep bringing it back. I say, remember back the first lecture. Why did you come here? Because usually people are drawn to philosophy for a specific reason. They're looking for something. Yeah. What is it that they're looking for? Well, usually they're looking for meaning. Why are they looking for meaning? And why is it that, first of all, why is it that perhaps academic philosophy doesn't really do this or doesn't acknowledge that? But second of all, what is it that can be done, should be done, must be done in terms of providing, again, a space for these exercises, practices, etc.?
Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned this to you last time.
Yeah.
I'm in discussion, and Guy also knows this, there are emerging communities of practice that are trying to create set ecologies of practices. But what I often find is that's missing from them is philosophia. Yeah. So there's a lot of the other stuff around, a lot of the things that we're talking about. There's mindfulness practices and movement practices and authentic discourse practices and narrative practices and all of this. And don't get me wrong. I think this is great, and I actively work to support and facilitate this. But what I often find missing is the philosophia.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what's interesting about that, right? Is like I'm wondering about like correct me if I'm wrong, but the religion without religion.
Religion is not a religion. That's my preferred way of
not a
talking.
religion.
Yeah.
Like I don't get the sense from it. It's not, you're not looking to build a non-religious church or something.
No, I'm not trying to found a religion. I will keep saying that to the day I die.
And I'm wondering about if bringing the thing that unites all of these practices, the theoria, the philosophy, awakening, because to me, this is about, like, philosophy is about awakening the wonder, right? Yeah. And having that sense of things. And I find with teaching people that there is a sense where you have to awaken it. Like in a
yeah. That's why I called it awakening from the meaning crisis.
Yeah. And it's because people aren't walking in with an awareness at all. In fact, the idea, word philosophy, they will proactively feel that that's like assaulting or something to being in your head or something like that. So one of the things I found is it's like, and I think I've gotten better as a teacher over the years in that sense of feeling the place where you can have them see it.
Yes.
And then you can see that moment where, like, they see something, they experience something that was right in front of them their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it never been questioned. And it's a question, and you can see that awakening.
Socratic aporia. That's really what Socratic aporia is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right? Get you to what you thought what was so familiar and so obvious suddenly is now mysterious to you in a profound way. I mean, that's the whole point of Socratic aporia. I agree. I mean, that's why, and Johannes picked up on that. That's why I try to make a distinction between philosophy, which I think is still important, by the way. All right, but and philosophia, which I think is something more that I'm neutral on whether or not everybody needs to do philosophy, but I think everybody needs to practice and live philosophia in a profound way. And so I think those are, because I guess I want to pick up on that point you were making about, you can bring people to that point where they get, well, it's, to use our metaphor, you get a crack in the wall.
Yeah.
You get an opening, right? It's like the Leonard Cohen line where, there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light shines through, right? Really, I think everybody, because of what we're in and where we are, I think that's why everybody ultimately needs philosophia. So while I deeply applaud, and I put time and effort and talent into these emerging communities, I think there is still, right, we've got to get philosophia into them in some way. That's why this discussion is very important, by the way. That's one of the reasons, I mean, other than really liking you guys and enjoying the conversation, one of the reasons I'm in this conversation is precisely because I think it's trying to do that. It's trying to bring philosophia into this attempt to get these ecologies of practices going.
Mm-hmm. Right.
On this point of philosophia, perhaps also some other point, we'll have to carve out what that is and what that means.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
And you might disagree with this totally, both of you, I don't know. But one of the dangers I see, and Hegel speaks of this, I think, in the Differenzschrift. He says it would be absurd to call oneself a Platonist today. And what I think what he means by this is that you can't just pick and choose.
No.
So you can't just go back and say, "Oh, I'm a new Aristotelian. I'm an Aristotelian. I'm a Platonist. I'm a Stoic. I'm this. I'm that," as if from a metaphysical supermarket. Because that's very easy to do, right? I'm gonna be a bit of a Buddhist over here. I'm gonna be this, that. But what does it mean that we have this rich source or origin, but also this burden of all of this knowledge, because philosophy is also extremely abstract
Mhm.
and well, it also is a burden to have access to all of that potential knowledge. And the question is, so if we use the word philosophia, to some degree that's going back to the Greek word, of course, right? That's the
Yeah,
philosophia. But how, for me, I think it would be extremely important to not be some ism, some part from this ism,
no,
some
no,
part
no.
from
Yeah.
that ism, but something uniquely of this epoch, right? Uniquely of this age, that speaks to this age, but that takes, of course, direction and orientation from the wisdom of what has been, but doesn't sort of mix it up too much. Do you see what I mean? It's creating it. It's sort of it's generating itself out of that which has been, but in such a way that responds to us, to us specifically today in our.
I totally agree with that. That's why but I don't know how to articulate it, and I often thrash around with metaphors. I talk about salvaging, which is my way of trying to, like, you're sort of diving into the depths and bringing up what was valuable, and then trying to refurbish it. And it's a poor metaphor, and I need a better one.
Yeah.
But that's part of what I'm trying to say when I say the religion that's not a religion. The reason why I think, even though I find Plato sacred, and Plotinus is sacred for me too, I'm not a Neoplatonist in the sense that I can't. The axial age, two worlds mythos is not viable for me. It's just not viable for me. So while I want to respond to, and I want to let the tradition flow into me, but exactly what you said, right? I want to open to the. I want exactly. I think what you're saying. That's part of what I'm trying to put my finger on with the religion that's not a religion.
Yes,
it picks up on the sacredness, but it's for now.
Okay, because now I get. Now I think I understand that name better, because it now reminded me of Heidegger's unnamed gods.
Yes,
he doesn't name them because he doesn't want to give us, oh, look, you should believe in Zeus and Hera. And we can't go back to Greek mythology. That would be a bit ridiculous. Yes. So they're unnamed for now, because this, unfortunately or fortunately, who knows, is an epoch where gods have disappeared, where the godly is disappearing and withdrawing. But what we can still say, that there is a flickering, some lingering, some gloom of them still there, something that's still there, that's still an echo of the divine, but we can't name it. We shouldn't name it, because what I don't like about isms is that they're already ossified, right? They're like, it's already I'm this ism and that's it. So this is what if we, because that's almost against subjectivity, just asserting itself, right? I'm this ism and therefore everything's fine, I don't have to worry about it. No, that's not the age we live in. We live in the age of nothing makes sense to some degree, but it's the tide is already coming back. There is it's like Nietzsche speaks of the halcyon tone, right? Of the tone of the halcyon bird, which already hears the halcyon bird breeds during two weeks or a couple of weeks when the ocean is still, and knows that tempest will come again, and it's prepared for the horror, the terror that's about to come. But but it doesn't sort of, what I'm trying to say is this way of thinking, philosophia is a good name for it, because it's also quite open, right? But if we stifle it with isms, then it's almost like what would happen is you can produce a consumer product, right?
Exactly. I mean, and so part of it, I think, is actually a bidirectional critique, which the one we're giving voice to now is to try to resolve this through nostalgia, and that's a deep mistake. I think also trying to resolve this through a utopia which has a completed picture of the future is also a deep mistake. I think these things are not the proper framing that we need for what I'm calling philosophia.
Well, that's the work then that needs to be done, right? That's the work, not sort of framing all of philosophia, but bringing, well, giving birth to philosophia, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's more about exemplifying and participating in it.
Yeah.
Again, I'm gonna be. I will of course theorize it because that's also.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we do. Yeah.
That's my job and my work.
Step on it and then.
Oh yeah, kind of.
Yes.
But you know, it's really interesting how hard it is. I mean, you know, it's coming sort of easy for us, but it's hard to get people, because often if you say, you know, give up nostalgia, they go, oh yes, I get that, utopia. And you say, or if you say to people, no, not utopia, and they go, oh yes, I get that, nostalgia, right? And it's like, no. The grammar that's generating both of those is what I'm asking you to step beyond. And then that's when there's the glimmer of horror in their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And that's the moment that requires deep respect of the person you're talking to, deep sensitivity, and a willingness to linger and be patient with them. And sorry, that came off as condescending, and I didn't mean it to be condescending. I meant it to be caring.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go soon, guys. We've been talking for 2 hours, and I foresee that we could talk for without any without any difficulty. This was extremely fruitful. I found this very helpful and also deeply joyful to participate in. So thank you, both of you, very much.
Thank you very much.
Horrified with both of you.
Well, I'm hoping this is the first of many of these. I would like it if I could have the file of this, because I'd like to put so I'm going to upload the discussion I had with Johannes to my Voices with Vervaeke site that comes out Sundays at 1. And it would be great if I had this as a follow-up to upload. So
I'll send it over to you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So let's keep doing this. Let's meet up again. And let's do this again, because I found it extremely valuable.
And I also just want to say that from my experience of doing these, right, and putting them up and having people watch them, these things in themselves is awakening, right?
Yes, totally.
Reading, there's just got it
invites, right? It invites participation. It does.
Something I just want to say that, like, what the very thing that we're talking about is actually the thing that we're doing in some regard, and just people watching it.
Yeah.
Because I've heard people talk about, like, it awakens something in them.
Yep.
Right?
Totally. That's dialogos. It's what both what we're explicating and exemplifying are in deep resonance with each other, and they're mutually affording each other. That's part of dialogos, for sure.
Yes.
So we will talk again soon, I hope.
Yes. Thank you both very much. Thank you,
guys.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.